Hi guys, and welcome on Cheaters and Jerks. This channel is about real-life cheating stories and consequences.
My voice broke, and my head bowed as sobs racked through me. Please, tell me what to do to fix this. What I want, he repeated, the smirk on his face warping into something less human. He leaned back against the couch again, hand lazily guiding the blonde's deep movements. What I want is exactly what I've got right now. But let's start from the beginning, right after your subscription to this channel. The dishwasher hummed, a steady, mechanical rhythm that contrasted against the quiet of the house. I sat at the kitchen table, cradling my wine glass, my fingers tracing the thin lip as if I was waiting for something, anything, to disrupt the stillness. The backyard stretched out before me through the sliding glass door, its glow faint under the solar garden lights that Mark insisted on buying last summer. The swing set barely moved in the breeze, a shadow of what it once was. The neighborhood kids hadn't set foot there in months. That didn't stop Mark from keeping it pristine, though. A power wash every spring, a coat of varnish when the wood started to dull. Another item on his never-ending list of ways to keep our life in perfect order. I took a sip of the wine. Dry, sharp, not even close to the French Merlot on the calendar vibe the label was going for. But I swallowed anyway, letting it sit on my tongue longer than I probably should have. The glass hovered in my hand, but I stared past it at the backyard. It's not like I hated Mark. That would have made all of this easier. And it wasn't as though he had done something specific to make me feel this way. If anyone asked, I'd even say he was a good man, the sort of guy who fixed leaking faucets on Sunday mornings, who remembered anniversaries without needing a calendar reminder. But that same goodness felt stifling, predictable, like a tightrope I had to tiptoe across while holding my breath. I tipped the last of the wine into my mouth and set the glass down with a soft clink. It had been like this for months now, a dull cycle of noticing every single little crack in the foundation without actually wanting to mend it. That's why I downloaded the app. A small rebellion, I called it in my mind. A harmless escape. I wasn't planning on doing anything beyond swiping for an hour or two, flirting with faceless names that meant nothing to me. And then Derek messaged. His photo didn't scream danger, not at first. It wasn't the douchey gym selfie or oversized sunglasses shot that half the guys on there used. He looked normal, easygoing even. But his first message hit different. Late night wine? Tell me you're pretending it's 2010 and you're listening to MGMT on repeat. I laughed out loud, and that was it. By the third exchange, I'd stopped wondering why I was doing this. I just was. It wasn't long before we met in person. Coffee. Nothing in a crowd of tables outside a cafe where no one would recognize me. He showed up in a worn leather jacket that hugged his frame too well not to have been deliberate. His smile lopsided and so self-assured I barely noticed I was matching it. For an hour, I forgot everything. Canceled errands to meet a deadline, the overcast mood in Dad's last voicemail, Mark's preoccupied comments about mortgage refinancing. Derek's attention felt like a spotlight. After that, it spiraled faster than I expected. Or maybe I just stopped caring how fast it went. Derek wasn't the only one. Once the app was warm under my fingers, it felt like flipping channels in a world where every option seemed more enticing than the one in the room with me. I wrapped it all in excuses so thin even I could see through them. But Mark? He didn't push when I threw working late at him like a brick wall. He trusted me. That made it worse, somehow. 3 nights ago, Derek shifted the tone completely. Why keep it tucked away in boring hotel rooms? He said, sipping whatever trendy beer he'd talked the bartender into giving him. Ever thought about home base? What do you mean? My voice was skeptical, clashing with the blush I could feel creeping up my neck. Your backyard in the backyard, he said, grinning like someone who knew exactly how insane they sounded. It's private enough, romantic, dangerous, sure, but that's the fun. I rolled my eyes, but the laughter that spilled out wasn't as dismissive as I wanted it to be. You're insane. Don't think about it too much. He leaned forward, voice dropping low. Just imagine. The air cooler, the garden lights spilling gold across the yard. Nobody but us. Well, he hesitated for a second, and then said it too casually, as if dropping a line to see if I'd bite. Maybe some friends. Friends, I repeated, incredulous. But I tilted my glass and took a sip, watching his face carefully. You know, people do this kind of thing all the time. He folded his hands under his chin, mock innocent. His eyes glinted, sharp and dangerous. Nobody says you have to. Stop, I said, laughing. Just stop. But late that night, lying next to a peacefully sleeping Mark, the idea crept back in, sticky and impossible to shake. I kept hearing Derek's low murmur, the electricity in it, imagining all the things I hadn't said no to. The yard indeed felt alive, every inch crackling with the kind of electricity that only comes when you've crossed into forbidden territory. I stood there, barefoot on the damp grass, feeling the chill seep up through my feet and thrill shiver down my spine. My pulse raced as Derek led me toward the swing set, his touch both commanding and gentle. The dress I wore was nothing but a flimsy barrier, the straps slipping off my shoulders as his hands moved like whispers down my arms. His fingers felt cold against my skin, and when he tied my wrists to the chains of the swing set, the metal bit into my flesh with a stinging reminder of my choice. I tilted my head back, exhaling a breath I didn't even know I was holding, feeling a heady mix of vulnerability and anticipation wash over me. From the corners of my eyes, I caught the shadows of the men Derek had brought along. Strangers. Their names blurred together, if I even bothered to catch them in the first place. Their low murmurs turned into a dark and intoxicating symphony, mingling with the creak of the swing chains. A strong hand gripped my waist first, holding me steady, as another man leaned close, his breath warm against my neck. His touch made me tense for a moment before I let myself relax, surrendering to the sensations. A series of hands and mouths began to explore me, each claiming a piece as Derek watched with a dark satisfaction gleaming in his green eyes. The boundaries of my world contracted to the gasps, the murmurs of approval, and the raw, carnal energy pulsating around me. The anonymity of it, the sheer audacity of what we were doing in my own backyard, and they were in my special backyard too, amplified everything. But just as I was sinking deeper into that wicked current, the hum of the moment shattered. An all too familiar sound, a car engine in the driveway. My heart stopped. My head snapped toward the source of the noise, but the tall fence blocked my view. "What's that?" I hissed, panicked. The words felt sharp, urgent. Derek's lips continued to graze my collarbone, his hands exploring, ignoring my rising fear. One of the men chuckled under his breath, but it sounded forced, uneasy. The engine cut off, and the sudden silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Footsteps. Heavy and resolute, they approached with a rhythm that screamed intent. My wrists tugged against the chains involuntarily, a mix of dread and adrenaline pumping through my veins. The steps grew louder, more distinct, until the gate creaked open. The man who entered the yard cast a daunting silhouette. Mark. His eyes immediately locked onto mine, a tempest of betrayal and confusion swirling within them. "Emily," Mark said, his voice low and sharp. Her name wasn't a question. It was an accusation. I opened my mouth, stumbling over my words like a deer caught in headlights. "Should you not be later?" The question hung stupidly in the air, a pathetic attempt to distract from the undeniable truth splayed out before him. My mind raced, grasping for an explanation, an excuse, anything to claw back from this precipice of disaster. But there was nothing. This was my doing, my temptation, brought to life, and now impossible to undo. The first man bolted, charging past Mark without so much as a glance. Mark didn't bother stopping him. His eyes were fixated on Derek, who stepped forward, hands tentatively raised like he might still defuse the ticking time bomb in front of him. "Get the hell away from her," Mark growled, the fury in his voice barely contained. Derek wavered for a moment, then raised his hands higher, defensively. But Mark didn't wait for an answer. He lunged, his fist crashing into Derek's jaw with a sickening thud. "Stop! Mark! Stop!" I screamed, my voice cracking like glass hitting pavement. I twisted against the chains, every muscle in my body tensed with the horrifying reality of what was happening. Derek stumbled back, blood streaming from his nose, disoriented. The last man, who I barely registered before, ran off into the shadows, not looking back. Typical. Mark turned his gaze to me then, his chest heaving, eyes brimming with betrayal. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, the words cracking. I started sobbing, yanking at the chains, cutting into my wrists. It's not... My voice came out garbled, disjointed. Panic took over, making my words meaningless gibberish. "Untie me!" I begged, voice raw with desperation. He just stood there, staring at me like I was someone he didn't know. His silence was agonizing, louder than any scream. Finally, he moved toward me, but not to untie me. He turned on his heel and walked toward the house, vanishing through the back door without looking back. "Mark!" I screamed after him, the chains biting into my wrists as I thrashed. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, the knot gave way. I collapsed onto the cold grass, the shock vibrating through my bones. Scrambling to my feet, I clutched my stinging wrists and ran inside. The house was eerily silent, save for the sound of my labored breathing. I found him in the bedroom, furiously shoving clothes into a duffel bag. "Mark, please," I sobbed, grabbing his arm in a futile attempt to stop him. "It didn't mean anything. I love you. His face was a mask of cold resolution. He shook off my hand as if touching me, physically hurt him. "Don't," he said, his voice flat. That one word hit harder than any slap, cutting deeper than any scream ever could. The guy who once held me close and whispered sweet nothings was gone, replaced by someone who saw me as nothing but a betrayal. All words abandoned me, leaving only the sound of his packing, the finality of each zip and fold marking the end of whatever we'd shared. I jolted awake at the sound of knocking, my heart racing as I stumbled out of bed. The house felt eerily quiet, a stark reminder of Mark's absence. I made my way to the door, running a hand through my tangled hair. "Coming!" I called out, my voice hoarse from sleep. I opened the door, squinting against the morning light. A man in a crisp uniform stood there, holding a stack of papers. "Emily Johnson?" he asked, his tone brusque. "Yes, that's me," I replied, a knot forming in my stomach. "You've been served," he said, thrusting the papers into my hands before turning on his heel and striding down the driveway. I stood there, frozen, as the reality of what just happened sank in. My legs gave out, and I sank to the floor, the cold tiles a shock against my bare skin. With trembling hands, I looked down at the documents. Divorce. The word jumped out at me, black and stark against the white paper. My vision blurred as I skimmed the contents, each line feeling like a slap in the face. "No, no, no," I muttered, flipping through the pages. Mark was filing for full ownership of the house. Irreconcilable differences, it said, but it was the details that made me want to vomit. There it was, in black and white, the swing set incident. My shame, my mistake, laid out in clinical terms for strangers to read and judge. I don't know how long I sat there on the floor, the paper scattered around me like fallen leaves. Eventually, I dragged myself up and stumbled to the kitchen. I grabbed a bottle of wine from the fridge, not caring that it was barely past noon. As I gulped down the first glass, my phone buzzed. A text from my lawyer. "Emily, we need to talk about the divorce filing. Call me ASAP." I ignored it, pouring another glass instead. The house felt too big, too empty. I wandered from room to room, memories assaulting me at every turn. Mark and I dancing in the living room after we first moved in. Lazy Sunday mornings in bed. The first time we fought in the kitchen over something so trivial I couldn't even remember now. And always, the view of the backyard. The swing set stood there, a silent accusation. I couldn't bring myself to look at it directly. Days blurred together. I barely ate, barely slept. My lawyer's calls became more insistent, but I couldn't face reality yet. It wasn't until he showed up at my door that I finally had to confront what was happening. "Emily, we have a court date," he said, his face a mixture of concern and frustration. "You need to pull yourself together. This is serious." I nodded numbly, finally agreeing to meet him at his office to discuss strategy. But what strategy could there be? I was the one who had screwed up. I was the one who had destroyed everything. The day of the court hearing arrived faster than I thought possible. I stood in front of the mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back at me. Dark circles under my eyes, hair limp and unwashed. I did my best to make myself presentable, but it felt like putting makeup on a corpse. The courtroom was colder than I expected, the air conditioning a shock to my system as I entered. My lawyer guided me to our seats, his hand on my elbow, as if he thought I might bolt at any moment. And then I saw him. Mark. He sat across the aisle, looking impeccable in a dark suit. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and the pain and anger I saw there made me flinch. I quickly looked away, focusing on the worn wood of the table in front of me. "All rise," the bailiff called out as the judge entered. The proceedings began, and I felt like I was watching it all happen to someone else. Mark's lawyer spoke first, his voice confident and clear as he outlined their demands. "Your Honor, my client is seeking full ownership of the marital home and vehicle, as well as financial restitution for expenses related to the defendant's reckless and humiliating behavior." I flinched at the words, feeling them like physical blows. My lawyer stood to counter, but his arguments sounded weak and unconvincing even to my ears. "Your Honor, while my client acknowledges her indiscretion, we believe the demands for full property forfeiture are excessive." The judge's gaze fell on me, and I felt myself shrinking under his scrutiny. His voice was sharp when he addressed me directly. "Ms. Johnson, can you explain the events of July 15th, specifically the incident involving the backyard swing set?" My cheeks burned with shame as I struggled to find words. How could I possibly explain? How could I make anyone understand the loneliness, the desperation that had led me to that moment? I made a mistake, Your Honor," I managed to stammer out. "I never meant to hurt anyone." The judge's expression remained impassive, but I could feel the weight of judgment in the air. As the hearing continued, I became acutely aware of every whisper, every sidelong glance from the court staff and observers. When it was over, I fled the courtroom, barely hearing my lawyer calling after me. I made it to my car before the tears started. Great heaving sobs that left me gasping for air. The following weeks were a blur of shame and isolation. News travels fast in small towns, and it seemed like everyone knew about the divorce and the reasons behind it. I noticed the stares at the grocery store, the hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when I walked by. Former friends crossed the street to avoid me. I overheard snippets of gossip. "Did you hear about Emily, the swing set?" followed by shocked laughter or disgusted tusks. I retreated into the house, unable to face the outside world. But even there, I found no peace. Mark hadn't moved out yet, and his presence was like a physical weight, pressing down on me. We moved around each other like ghosts, careful never to occupy the same space at the same time. The silence was deafening. Every night I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of my marriage. Where had it all gone wrong? When had I become this person I didn't recognize? The day of the final court hearing arrived. I sat outside the courtroom, my hands shaking as I clutched my lawyer's briefcase. I didn't want to go in. I didn't want to face Mark or hear the judge's final decision, but I had no choice. The proceedings were mercifully brief. The judge's voice was firm as he delivered his ruling. In the matter of Johnson versus Johnson, the court rules in favor of the plaintiff. Mr. Johnson is awarded full ownership of the marital home and vehicle. Ms. Johnson is ordered to vacate the premises within 30 days. Furthermore, all joint financial assets will be transferred to Mr. Johnson's sole control. I felt the air leave my lungs as if I'd been punched. I looked across the aisle at Mark, hoping to see what? Sympathy? A flicker of the love we once shared? But his face was a mask, his eyes cold and distant. The ride home was silent, the weight of the judge's words hanging between us. As soon as we arrived, I went upstairs to start packing. Each item I placed in a box felt like another piece of my life being stripped away. I caught a glimpse of the backyard through the window. The swing set stood there, mocking me, a monument to my mistakes, to the life I had destroyed. When the final day came, I stood in the entryway, a single suitcase at my feet. I'd left a note on the kitchen counter, an apology Mark would probably never read. As I turned the key in the lock for the last time, the finality of it all hit me like a wave. I was no longer a wife, no longer desired, no longer protected from the consequences of my actions. As I walked down the driveway, I felt the weight of eyes on me, neighbors peeking out from behind curtains, whispering and judging. I kept my head down, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I had no idea where I was going or what my life would look like now. All I knew was that I was leaving behind more than just a house. I was leaving behind the person I used to be, the life I had built and then destroyed. The taxi was waiting at the curb. As I climbed in, I allowed myself one last look at the house, at the yard, at the swing set. "Where to?" the driver asked. I hesitated, realizing I had no answer, no destination, no plan. "Just away," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Anywhere but here." As the taxi pulled away, I felt the last threads of my old life unraveling. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain. I would never be the same Emily again. 6 months had passed, but it hadn't felt like healing. It felt like hollow days bleeding into restless nights. I couldn't eat without tasting regret. Couldn't sleep without waking up choking on my mistakes. I told myself for months he'd eventually take my calls. That closure was just one heartfelt conversation away. But nothing. Silence. Or worse, blocked. And so I found myself standing on that familiar porch, heart hammering harder than it had any right to after all this time. The door wasn't locked, just as it had never been back when this was home for the both of us. It felt like an invitation, one planted by desperation itself. I turned the knob and let myself in. "Mark," I called out, my voice barely strong enough to carry. The air felt heavy, oppressive, like it didn't belong to me anymore. My gaze darted across the living room, searching for signs of him, or signs that I shouldn't be here at all. Footsteps carried me further into the house. The layout hadn't changed, not that I expected it to. Still, the weight of what had shifted between us clung to every piece of furniture, every framed photo on the walls. Finally, I rounded the corner, and there he was, sprawled on the couch, dominating the space like he'd always been good at, a glass of whiskey dangling effortlessly in his hand. For half a second, relief surged inside me, proof that he wasn't some ghost haunting my memory. Then my eyes dropped, my stomach plummeted. A blonde, kneeling right there in front of him, her head steady as it moved down there, her hands pressed against his legs, fingers curling into the denim like she needed the anchor. My breath locked in my chest. I felt my legs start to buckle, the world tilting and crashing all at once. I barely managed to whisper his name. "Mark!" His head turned so lazily, like he was completely unfazed by my presence. His blue eyes pinned me where I stood, and for a beat, I thought I saw something soft, an almost imperceptible fracture in his steady glare. Then his lips curled into a grin sharper than any knife. He laughed, low and humorless, slicing through me. Mark! This time, my voice broke, trembling. I stumbled forward before I even realized I had moved. Please! The blonde didn't even pause. Not a shift, not a glance at me, nothing. She was part of the furniture, just like that damn whiskey glass. Meanwhile, Mark's stare drilled into me, that crooked smirk growing, feeding off whatever flicker of dignity I still had left. What are you doing here, Emily? His voice was so calm, bordering on indulgent, like this entire moment was for his entertainment. My knees hit the floor beside him. I didn't even feel the impact, too frantic to get words out between shallow breaths. I'm sorry, I choked out, grabbing at his leg, my fingers trembling with every ounce of desperation I'd swallowed and suppressed these months. I'm so sorry. I messed up, Mark. I didn't know what I... You didn't know? His laugh rang out again, cutting me off. His hand rested languidly against the blonde's head, fingers tangling lazily in her hair near the nape. He looked disgustingly comfortable, so at ease in his throne of disgust and detachment. Is that really the excuse you're going with? Please! I cried, tears streaking hot down my face. My grip on his leg tightened, the fabric of his jeans twisting under my fingers. I'll do anything. Anything you want. Just tell me. You'll do anything. The words weren't a question. They were mockery, simmering with just enough venom to make the sting last. He leaned forward slightly, just enough to feel towering. You humiliated me, Emily. Do you know that? In ways I didn't even know were possible. And now you're here, begging. It's pathetic. My chest seized up. The blonde's movements never faltered. The obscene rhythm, like clockwork, ticking down my sanity. Mark casually tilted his glass, sipping slowly, his grin widening as he looked down at me. I didn't know what I was doing, I gasped, shaking so hard my words barely came out. I wasn't thinking. I love you. I love you so much that... My voice broke, and my head bowed as sobs racked through me. Please, tell me what to do to fix this. His laugh cut me in half. That cruel edge sent a chill up my spine. I'd never heard him laugh like this before. It wasn't his usual dry wit, nor the warm chuckle I fell in love with. This was hollow. Alien. What I want, he repeated, the smirk on his face warping into something less human. He leaned back against the couch again, hand lazily guiding the blonde's movements. What I want is exactly what I've got right now. The blow landed harder than anything physical could have. My hand slid from his leg, dropping to the floor as my head snapped up to meet his eyes, desperate to find something, anything, redeemable, buried behind them. But there was nothing there. Nothing except vindication. Cold and remorseless. Images of the two of us flashed in my mind. Late evenings tangled on the couch watching stupid movies. Lazy mornings bathed in quiet understanding. None of that man was here now. He'd wrapped himself in cruelty, and he wore it with pride. Go home, Emily. His voice turned distant, disinterested. The finality of it, pressing down on my chest like a weight I couldn't wriggle out from under. If you even have a home to go to. The blonde shifted, her pace speeding up, more deliberate now. I flinched when Mark let out a low groan, his head falling back against the cushions. The sound hit me like a physical shove, forcing me to stagger backward as my vision blurred with a fresh wave of tears. I moved numbly toward the door, my legs acting on autopilot because my mind had short-circuited somewhere between humiliation and utter despair. I paused with my hand gripping the frame, unable to stop myself from turning back, hoping, almost praying, that he might stop me, that he might say something, anything, to prove the man I loved was still somewhere inside the stranger on that couch. But Mark didn't move. He didn't even glance in my direction. Instead, his cruel laughter rang out again, sealing the cracks in my broken heart with molten, scalding shame. and all I could do was close the door behind me and stumble blindly into the night. Blindly into the night. Blindly into the night. Blindly into the night.